Picture this. You're sitting on your deck, hot mug of coffee in hand, watching the sun crawl up over the pines, feeling like you've finally beaten the rat race. And then, boom, 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 someone's practically kicking your front door off its hinges. You open up, still half in pajama mode, and there's this woman, 50s, icy blonde helmet hair, clutching a clipboard like it's the nuclear codes. She doesn't even blink. "I'm Linda Morrison, HOA president," she says, like she's announcing herself to the United Nations. "And you have exactly 72 hours to remove that unauthorized fire pit, repaint your deck the approved color, and relocate your garden, or we're initiating eviction." Yeah, you heard right. Eviction. Welcome to paradise, right? And let me tell you, the look in her eyes told me everything. This wasn't about fire pits or deck colors. This was about power, plain and simple. But you know what she didn't know? What nobody in Pine Ridge Estates could possibly have guessed. 37 days earlier, I'd bought her precious lakeside cabin and the entire HOA management company. Yeah, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I should introduce myself. I'm Jake Morrison. No relation, just a cosmic joke that we share the last name. Up until about 6 months ago, I was just your garden variety tech consultant in Denver, specializing in buying up companies, untangling who owned what, and generally keeping big corporations from accidentally eating themselves alive. I made good money, worked remotely, and after a decade and a half of city life, decided I wanted something quieter. Pine Ridge Estates was supposed to be my chill spot. 2-bedroom cabin, stone fireplace, view of the lake that looked photoshopped. I painted the deck a mellow sage green, set up a small fire pit, and even put in a veggie garden because, you know, who doesn't want fresh tomatoes with their morning emails? Neighbors seemed cool. Bob the retired carpenter next door, Sarah and Mike across the street, teachers, casserole wielders, the whole bit. Most folks minded their business, which was perfect for a guy trying to decompress from years of corporate chaos. Then, like a tornado in a power suit, Linda showed up on my doorstep. I'd been warned about HOA types, but nothing prepared me for this woman. She laid out her list of grievances: fire pit, deck color, garden placement, with the energy of someone who's practiced this speech in the mirror every morning. I tried to keep it friendly, suggested maybe we could compromise on the deck color. Maybe I'd move a tomato plant or two. Big mistake. "The rules are the rules," she snapped. "I don't negotiate with violators. 72 hours, or we begin the eviction process." And as she strutted off, she made sure I knew. 12 families had been forced out in the last 5 years for not towing the line. You know that feeling when you realize you're in way deeper than you meant to be? That was me, standing on my not-quite-legal deck, looking out at my peaceful little kingdom, realizing this was more than just a petty squabble. This was a pattern. This was Linda's kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist, all wrapped up in community standards and property values. So, that night, I did what any former corporate consultant with a grudge would do. I dug into the paperwork. HOA rules, bylaws, board meeting minutes. Found out Linda's interpretations always became the law of the land, because the board was stacked with her friends, and her brother-in-law ran the management company. Oh, and her husband was a retired judge. Neat, right? But here's the thing. What Linda didn't realize was that I'd spent my career learning how to untangle messes just like this, finding loopholes, understanding who actually pulled the strings. She thought she was dealing with a clueless homeowner. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with someone who knew how to buy the whole chessboard. You know what I mean? I started making moves. Called Linda to try, once again, for an adult conversation. 71 hours left. She barked, then hung up. Later, I caught her and her little crew circling my house, snapping photos, jotting notes, treating my fire pit like it was a meth lab. Her compliance officer, Patricia, looked embarrassed, like she knew this was all a circus, but wasn't allowed to say so. That was my cue to start talking to neighbors. Bob, the retired carpenter, immediately got serious. "That woman's the reason my best friend Tom moved away." One after another, the stories poured out. Families harassed for everything from mailbox height to the wrong shade of mulch. Kids called a noise nuisance. The Chins told their red lanterns weren't appropriate. Turns out, Linda's reign of terror had an ugly undercurrent. The longer she'd been in charge, the less diverse and more step-forward the neighborhood became. And anyone who pushed back got buried in violations until they left. That night, Fueled by a dangerous mix of anger and too much caffeine, I dove into public records. Turns out the original developer, Mountain View Properties, still owns some juicy water access rights, and the management contract for the HOA, Linda's brother-in-law's company, was just a subcontractor under a bigger, flailing company called Alpine Community Services. Both were struggling financially. If you had the cash and the know-how, buying them was just a matter of paperwork and signatures. I called some old colleagues, acquisition experts, finance people, quietly put in feelers about buying out Alpine and Mountain View. But I needed more than ownership. I needed allies. First stop, Patricia, the compliance officer. I caught her at the mailboxes, eased into a conversation about how the HOA was supposed to work. She was nervous, but admitted that irregularities in the enforcement process were routine, that she'd started making her own recordings of board meetings just in case. Jackpot. She was in. Next, Marcus Chun, one of Linda's most famous casualties. He'd moved his family out after Linda weaponized the HOA against his cultural decorations, even called child services on him. But, plot twist, he never sold his house. He'd kept it as a rental, waiting for his chance to take back his home. He agreed to help, even offered to move his family back if we could guarantee Linda was out for good. And then Tom Rodriguez, the sideline treasurer, who'd been quietly tracking every financial dirty trick Linda pulled. Payments to her husband's law firm, inflated management fees, landscaping contracts to her nephew. Individually, nothing illegal, he told me. But all together, it's a pattern, embezzlement, conflict of interest, the works. With my team set, I launched a 3-phase plan. Secretly, by controlling interests in both management companies, gather bulletproof evidence, thanks, Patricia and Tom, and prepare for the ultimate showdown at the next HOA meeting. And the cherry on top? Linda's own property was loaded with violations. Unapproved short-term rentals, illegal water use, you name it. She was guilty of the exact stuff she loved to punish others for. But Linda was smart. The day before our scheduled closing on the management company, she called an emergency HOA meeting to grant herself emergency powers. Basically, dictator status, able to evict anyone she didn't like, no due process. The community was scared. Some people bought her narrative about dangerous newcomers and property values. But enough were ready for change. That night at the meeting, Linda launched into her speech, painting me as a menace to community safety. But this time I was ready. Tom got up and started asking about finances. Patricia played audio of Linda openly targeting families for their backgrounds. I hooked up my phone and projected evidence of Linda's illegal short-term rentals, her oversized deck, her hot tub, all the things she claimed kept the community safe. The room erupted. One by one, people Linda had driven out stood up, the Chins, the Johnsons, the Martinez family. We're back, they said, and we're done living in fear. Then, the twist, Linda, desperate, called in the sheriff, claiming harassment. Sheriff Williams shows up, listens to the complaints, sees the evidence. I hand him a civil rights complaint, a copy of the AG's investigation, audio of Linda saying the quiet part out loud. In front of a packed room, Linda snaps, admitting, this community was built for a certain type of family. Her mask slips all the way off. The sheriff leads her out as the crowd watches in stunned silence. And just like that, 8 years of petty tyranny, broken. But here's where the real payoff comes. Over the next week, Linda's whole web unravels. She's hit with embezzlement charges, banned from HOA leadership, faces lawsuits from everyone she ever targeted. The families she forced out move back. The Facebook page explodes with stories of her abuse, and her own neighbors start serving her violation notices for the same stuff she punished others for. I'm not gonna lie, watching Linda's for sale sign go up on her precious lakeside cabin felt good. But what felt even better was Marcus Chin calling to say, we're home again, thanks to you. The new HOA board, Patricia, Tom, Marcus, start fixing the mess, refunding wronged families, opening the books, making every meeting public. No more secret dictatorships. And in the end, I called Linda. I'll help you sell your house, I told her. But only if you sign a confession, for the record, so nobody ever forgets what you did. She asked why. I said, because people deserve justice, and this community deserves the truth. So, tell me, who was right here? Me, Linda, or the neighbors who just wanted peace? Where's the line between protecting a community and controlling it? I'm sure folks will argue that in the comments. But I'll say this. Bullies win only when nobody stands up. And sometimes, the most satisfying way to fight back is to own the whole damn rulebook. So what would you have done? Drop your thoughts below. Right, wrong, somewhere in between. Let's talk about justice, power, and the fine line between order and oppression.